Welcome to the Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to share this with you today because we are looking at one of the biggest mysteries in the history of our planet. Just imagine, for a second, hopping into a time machine and traveling back a mere 50,000 years. You wouldn't step out into a lonely world dominated by just one type of human. No way. Instead, you'd find this crowded, incredibly diverse planet where several different kinds of humans were walking around at the exact same time. Some looked a lot like us, while others were built completely differently, shaped by these harsh climates and wild landscapes that would, quite honestly, break a modern person. But today, we're the only ones left. So it brings up a really fascinating question. If we weren't alone, what on earth happened to everyone else? Why are we the ones sitting here today while the rest of our human family tree is just gone? The immediate assumption most of us make is that Homo sapiens must have been the strongest, or maybe the smartest, or the ones who had been around the longest. But the truth is actually far slower, much messier, and infinitely more interesting. We aren't the last one standing just because we packed the most muscle or had the biggest brains. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the unbeatable veterans, Homo Erectus. To really wrap our heads around our place in the world, we have to look at the ultimate survivors. Think about the sheer scale of this timeline. Homo erectus showed up around 2 million years ago. To put that massive number into perspective, every single thing we have ever accomplished, every towering city we've built, every global war we fought, literally every language we've ever spoken, all of that fits neatly inside just the last few thousand years. We are basically a tiny footnote compared to their massive 2 million-year reign on Earth.
And they weren't just surviving either, they were thriving. These guys were highly adaptable. They were almost certainly the first human species to leave Africa, spreading out into completely unknown environments they hadn't even evolved for. Their bodies were the first to look recognizably human, with long legs meant for walking and running over open ground. Their brains were larger than their ancestors. And their stone tools, well, they used the exact same tools for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, that might sound like a lack of imagination, but it's actually the exact opposite. Their tools worked so perfectly for their environment that there was absolutely zero pressure to improve them.
But, even a 2 million-year run eventually has to end. By their final chapter, the world had literally left them behind. Their last populations were cut off on the island of Java in Indonesia, with absolutely no way to reach other groups. The forests they had always hunted in began shrinking, and their prey animals just disappeared. After surviving almost everything the Earth could throw at them, they simply ran out of space and options. Their last fossils date to around 110,000 years ago. Moving on to Section 2, the misunderstood cousins, Neanderthals. For decades, pop culture has completely written Neanderthals off as these dim, brutish cavemen. But we need to debunk that tired old myth right now, because that image is entirely wrong. They were incredibly tough and brilliantly adapted to their environments in ways that are hard to overstate. They had these compact, powerful bodies with really thick bones. They had large noses specifically designed to warm up freezing ice age air before it ever hit their lungs. In fact, their brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours. They controlled fire, made sophisticated tools, and even buried their dead with care. And because they hunted massive, dangerous animals at extremely close range, their skeletons actually show injury patterns remarkably similar to modern-day professional rodeo riders. I mean, they were tough as nails. So the crucial point is what happened when Homo sapiens began moving into their territory across Europe and Western Asia around 45,000 years ago. For a few thousand years, we actually lived side by side, and our DNA proves we even had children together. But there's a huge contrast here. Sapiens lived in larger groups with wide social networks. Neanderthals, on the other hand, generally lived in smaller, much more isolated groups. When the climate wildly shifted, bouncing back and forth between cold and warm periods, that isolation made it incredibly difficult for Neanderthals to share resources or recover from hard times. Eventually, competition and the changing climate just pushed their shrinking populations into extinction.
All right, Section 3, the genetic ghosts, Denisovans.
Now let's shift gears to an entirely different branch of the family tree, a group hiding in plain sight. They are completely different from everyone else on this list because we can barely physically see them. 1. That is the number of tiny finger bones it took to discover them. The entire discovery of this new human species began with a single fragment pulled from a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. A bone so incredibly small it could literally sit right in the palm of your hand. But when scientists extracted the DNA, it didn't match sapiens and it didn't match Neanderthals. It was a completely unknown branch of humans. Since then, we've only found a handful of teeth and a piece of jawbone, yet their genetic shadow is absolutely massive.
Denisovan DNA is woven right into modern populations today. Some Melanesian groups carry as much as 6% Denisovan DNA. And even more amazingly, living Tibetans inherited a specific Denisovan gene called EPAS1 that allows their bodies to function at extreme, thin air altitudes where most modern human bodies would simply fail. As a living population, they faded away roughly 30,000 years ago because their numbers were likely just too thin to survive a shifting world. But their genetic legacy is literally keeping people alive right now.
Next up, Section 4. The Island Oddity, Homo Floresiensis. To understand this next chapter, we have to travel back to Indonesia, to an incredible discovery made in 2003 on the island of Flores. Say hello to Homo Floresiensis. They stood barely 3 feet, so about 1 meter tall, and they had brains roughly the size of a grapefruit. At first, scientists thought this just had to be a mistake, right? Maybe modern humans with some kind of developmental disorder. But no, this was a completely separate species. Islands do wild things to evolution. Isolated for long periods, large animals shrink down and small animals grow. These tiny humans lived on an island alongside giant storks, dwarf elephants, and absolutely terrifying Komodo dragons. Their fossils date from about 100,000 to 60,000 years ago, and their tools suggest they actually held on until about 50,000 years ago. What's really telling here is that modern humans, Homo sapiens, were arriving in that exact region around the same time. Now, we don't know the exact details of their end, but it proves a crucial point. A species doesn't need a fiery meteor from the sky to go extinct. Sometimes a small isolated population facing brand new pressures simply runs out of time. And that brings us to Section 5, the Sapiens Secret. Exactly why did we survive? Now, what's really interesting about this is how it brings the entire mystery to its climax. If Neanderthals were highly intelligent, if Denisovans were perfectly adapted to extreme environments, if Homo erectus could survive for 2 whole million years, and if Homo floresiensis could survive alongside Komodo dragons, why are Homo sapiens the only human species left today? Notice the pattern when we look at their causes of decline. Shrinking habitat, isolated populations, thin numbers. Every single one of these incredibly tough, highly adapted species succumbed when they became isolated and their environment changed. Extreme physical adaptation and brute strength simply weren't enough when the world shifted beneath their feet. And that reveals the sapiens secret. The major difference between us and everyone else wasn't just individual brain power. It was how we connected those brains. Other human species possessed immense localized knowledge, sure, but it was largely locked into single locations and smaller groups. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, built wide, vast social networks. Our knowledge actually traveled between communities. We essentially mastered the network effect. Because we built connections across vast distances, our tools, our survival techniques, and our crucial knowledge moved fast, way faster and at a much larger scale than any other human species. If one sapiens group faced a catastrophic drought or a freezing winter, the things they had learned didn't just die out with them. That knowledge had already been shared with neighboring groups. We weren't locked into any single geographic place or any single survival strategy. We had the ultimate flexibility to reorganize. But hey, I want to make sure we stay completely grounded here. We were absolutely not predestined to be the last ones standing. As the source material brilliantly points out, pure unpredictable geographic luck was a major ingredient in our survival. We just happened to be in the right places with the right social behaviors in just enough population numbers at exactly the right moment in planetary history. Our cousins weren't just early drafts or stepping stones meant to lead to us. They were their own spectacular ways of being human. For almost the entirety of human history, we were just one branch on a very wild, incredibly diverse family tree. Today, through this amazing mix of social networking, adaptability, and honestly sheer luck, we're the only ones left to tell the story, which leaves us with a pretty profound thought to ponder. Now that we hold the exclusive title of the final human species on Earth, what exactly are we going to do with that incredible legacy? Thanks for exploring this amazing piece of our history with me. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.